All right. Good afternoon again, everyone. As I said earlier, it's nice to see many of you, lots of familiar names and faces. My name is Anwar Naja Durak. I am the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs in the School of Social Work, and we're very happy to have all of you with us today. This is our third ASWB licensing exam panel. And in a minute, I will introduce our panelists, but we'll at this point really take this time to thank them for their willingness to do this. They're not getting paid. We're not even giving them a mug or anything. We perhaps should think about doing that. They are doing this for, of their own accord, wanting to support all of you. So I really appreciate that. I'll also take a moment to thank all of our advisors, Lawrence Robinson, Naila Burks, Andre Iapalo, whose name I kill, I got to work on that, and Jeffrey Jones, who all work on this project, and happy that they're here with us and grateful for their assistance. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. We do this event to support our students and alums as you think about preparing to take the ASWB exam. And for many of us, me included, this exam engenders some anxiety, and our hope is to give you information that will help alleviate some of that anxiety and hopefully give you some tips that will help you to better prepare so that you can successfully complete this exam. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the exam. Everyone can see it? All right. These are pictures of our lovely panelists. Let's see if that works. There we go. So let me just say that this PowerPoint is going to be posted on our website, so you'll all have access to it, and we'll send these to you, and also some additional information for those of you that RSVP'd for this event. These two links are information that we have in the School of Social Work. So we have exams, licensure prep exams available on the school's continuing education webpage. And some of the panelists probably use some of these. They may talk about them. The cost for them is very low. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that as one way to think about helping you prepare. And then also on our webpage, we have information about a licensure mentor program, which is run through our alumni association in the school. Some folks probably on the call may have participated. I know, for example, Lawrence did. So if later anyone has a question about that, he might be able to answer that question as well. It is kind of a group model. So there are multiple folks that are paired with a mentor to help them prepare for the exam. So I would encourage you again to take a look at that. So the Association of Social Work Boards has a lot of information about this exam, and I would really encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to visit their website. So I pulled this from their website. They give you information about what to do before you take the exam. You can download a free candidate handbook of the exam. It allows you to apply to your state or provincial board if you're a Canadian student. It allows you to register, and it explains the process of how you have to wait to get authorized to take the test. And then you schedule your test, you review the rules agreement, and then there's a confidentiality statement before you do all of that. I mean, do we have time? I don't know if we have time, and I'm afraid of my computer going a little crazy, but if you click on this link, it's got a really short, like a 2-minute video that just talks about the process and basically describes what I just went through. Again, encourage you to take the time to just get familiar with that website because it's got a lot of good information. And one of the best ways to think about preparing for this exam is just to learn as much as you can about it. Part of what you're going to do today is learn about it through the lens of our panelists and add to that your own experiences. And that should include really getting familiar with that website. The Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB, is the organization that puts this exam together. So the more you can find out about them and how they put this exam together, the less anxious you will be about this exam. All right. So, sorry. The Michigan Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, sometimes you will hear of this as referred to as LARA. Form is the state licensing bureau that handles our license. And in Michigan, we all know that we have to be licensed in order to practice social work and also to be able to call ourselves social workers. So if you want to work as a social worker in Michigan, you need to work with LARA and get licensed in order to practice. And of course, we are all making sure that we are licensed to make sure that we're taking into consideration readiness and to provide services for clients who seek social work services. The Association of Social Work Boards is created and is responsible for creating and delivering social work licensure exam, as I mentioned. They are a nonprofit association, and they work with regulatory bodies in the US and Canada, including obviously the state of Michigan. All 50 states, including obviously DC, they also work with the US Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and all 10 Canadian provinces. And the mission is written at the bottom there. As you can see, their focus is on making sure that social work is regulated to make sure that there's safe, competent, and ethical practice to strengthen public protection. That's how they identify their mission. And so you'll see their material that will refer to that often. So the exam requirements, what we're going to do today, obviously, we'll focus on the MSW exams. I'm not sure if some of you are here who are planning to take the bachelor's exam. A lot of what we talk about will obviously is true for BSWs, but this exam, the exam that we're going to talk about today focuses on MSW. When you go on the ASWB site, they talk about 4 different exams. They talk about the bachelor's exam, they refer to a master's exam, and then they talk about the clinical exam and the advanced generalist exam. Today, we're going to focus on the either the clinical exam or the advanced generalist. The master's exam is not one that Michigan requires. Some jurisdictions like Ohio requires students even to take that one, but in Michigan, we don't require that. So you're either going to take the clinical or the advanced generalist if you're applying for your full license as a master social worker. The exam for a bachelor's is different. Again, I just want to make sure that folks know that we're focusing on these 2 exams today. So let me just make some general comments about the exam. And you'll see this when you look at material. The exam contains 170 multiple choice questions. They're all multiple choice, and there's 4 options for each question. There are 4 possible answers. All of them are like that. 20 are non-scored items, and these are being pre-tested for possible inclusion as a scored question on future exams. So you're going to take 170. You won't know which 20 are not being used for your exam. 150 will be counted towards your score. The other 20, they're testing them to see if there are issues with them. If a lot of people get them wrong, they pull them back and try to work on them. So that's one of the ways they try to keep the exam equitable and fair, is what you will hear. The pretest and scored items are mixed together on the exam. Again, you won't know which ones they are. So these are, I'm sure many of us have heard a lot of different things about the exam. Many of us have very strong feelings about the exam. What we want to do today is just give you information. There are 3 levels of questions on the exam. And the way that they're structured is really focused on the types of thinking or the cognitive levels that are required to do when answering these test questions. And I will say that I've also read, and I'm sure you'll see this as well, that the exam is written at the 10th grade level, excluding the jargon, the social work terminology that you'll hear. So that's important to note as well. The level 1 questions are referred to as recall questions. These are questions that, and I'll read it here just because I think it's important. A description or definition without application to a given situation requires remembering previously learned material from a broad range of information. So they might, the question might say something like, you know, this is you have to have had this diagnosis. Whoops. If we can give folks to please mute your line for everybody, that would be very helpful. It's, you know, one of them might be, in order to diagnose major depression, you have to have symptoms over a certain length of time, for example, in the DSM. So you would have to know that. That's an example of a recall question. Whereas level 2 questions are application questions. So this is where you use use of information in a straightforward, specific setting, involves the ability to use learned material in a new and concrete situations, and may also include the application of rules, methods, concepts, principles, laws, or theories. So something will be described and you'll have to really be able to understand it in a way to apply it to answer a question. And then level 3 are reasoning questions, and folks will say these are the hardest questions, right? This is the ability to use information in a certain context with more information and options available. You have to use your judgment. You have to involve the ability to break the material into its various components to understand the structure. It can also involve identifying the parts, analyzing relationship between the parts, and the ability to put parts together to form a new whole. So for these questions, they often give you like a description, what they, and then they're asked a question. For example, here's a scenario, what would you do first? And that requires you to really analyze what is being said and then be able to answer that question. So, as I said, the reading skills for this exam is at the 10th grade level, not counting social work terms. I think it's important to know these are the basic rules to start to think about preparing for this exam. I think critical thinking skills are key. These are questions that require problem solving and reasoning ability. And this is the difference that you will note when you're looking at level 1, 2, or 3 questions. One of the things that students would often say to me after they graduated and would take this exam, they'd say, you know, I read some of the questions and I didn't agree with the answer because in my employment, this isn't what we would do. And what's important to remember about this is that this exam isn't written about what each of us would do personally. The people who write the questions for this exam are writing them based on what research says is best practice. So if you read a question about a situation where someone is supposed to file a child abuse and neglect charge, and you say, well, I would never, you know, I wouldn't do that. And where I work, we wouldn't do that. But best practice says that's in this situation like that, research says that's what you're supposed to do, or best practice is that the person writing the question is using that research and that information about best practices. So that's what you have to remember. And it's written for all regions. So it's not written about what we would do in Michigan versus, you know, Florida or California or Canada. So those are things you want to keep in mind as well. The other, of course, is anxiety management. The reality is this is a high stakes exam and the cost is $260. No one wants to pay more. We're already paying a great deal, obviously. So managing anxiety becomes extremely important. And I think that's one of the areas that folks struggle with the most. And I would encourage folks to think about dealing with that in a way that would work best for you before you go down this path. And lastly, these are things I'm sure you'll hear some of our colleagues say this, you know, share some of their thoughts, and we'll include this idea of, right, we take responsibility for our license, being mindful of the laws, rules, and expectations, and, you know, knowing who you are and sort of how you work and what's important, and knowing your needs and abilities, monitoring your own readiness and capacity. And of course, you know, we're all doing this because we want to make sure that we practice safely and ethically, and that we continue our professional development so that we can be sure that we do that. All right. That's it. I just wanted to kind of give an overview, and I'm sure my colleagues will share their own thoughts that will probably build on some of that. And so we have 4 panelists. I'll just take a minute to introduce them and thank them again. And the way that these are listed, we'll go through, and I have each of them has about 5 slides. We'll have them present their slides, and then we'll take some time for a question and answer, and we'll see if we can have enough time to, how much time we'll have to do that. Our first panelist is Kendra Wells, who's an LMSW. She received her MSW in 2018. She's a manager of research support here at Wayne State School of Social Work and our Center of Social Work Research. She passed the advanced generalist exam. And I won't take the time to read the rest of this because I want to make sure save time that they can share their information. But this each of them shared some information about their background, what they do professionally, just to give you an idea of what they did as they prepared for the exam. Our second panelist is Eric Schimmel, who is also an LMSW. His degree is also from 2018, and he's a project coordinator for our school as part of the Opioid Workforce Expansion Program, our OEP, which is a HRSA grant, and works with placing students and overseeing this, the grant. He passed also the advanced generalist exam in April of 22. So recently, both he and Kendra, and so they'll be able to share their very recent experience. Christina Henning got her degree in 2019, and she's a clinical social worker at Southwest Counseling Solutions. She passed the clinical social work licensing exam in February of 2021. And last, certainly not least, is Lisa Gordon, who's also an LMSW. LMSW, she has received her MSW from us in 2020. She's a clinical therapist at Easter Seals, also has private practice with Hope is Here Counseling. And she passed in May of 2022. So with that, I'm going to ask that Kendra take it over. And Kendra, I have the PowerPoint, so tell me when to go and I'll just move them forward, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Anwar. So hi, everyone. My name is Kendra Wells. As Anwar said, I passed the advanced generalist exam this year in April, and I currently work in research at the school. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thanks. So to prepare for the exam, it was, I think, a little unique for me. I decided to wait until I had all of my work experience hours to take the exam, which I have heard from some people that it's easier for macro students to take the exam immediately because they have that clinical information in their head. But I disagreed. I thought that I wanted the experience first so that I could use my experience to get through those reasoning and application questions a little bit easier. And that actually worked for me. But then when it came time to prepare for the exam, I realized that it had been, 4 years since my degree, and I didn't remember any of the clinical stuff that I had learned. To add on top of that, I did the BSW and then the MSW advanced. So my clinical information was from my BSW. So that was even longer ago. So I really felt like I was studying for a test that I wouldn't know a lot of the information on. So to prepare for that, I decided to focus primarily on the clinical information and hope that my 4 years of experience would be okay to get me through most of the macro questions. To get that clinical information, I opted, which I understand is a privilege, but I opted to pay the $300 to get the Therapist Development Center study system. I highly recommend this if you have the opportunity to do so, especially for advanced generalist tests. It is very structured. It gave me a 2-month outline study period. Here's what you study this week. Here's what you study this week for 2 whole months. And it gave me all of that clinical information because it's geared toward the clinical exam. It was much easier and much more accessible for me than going through old class notes or textbooks that I still have. Like, I had all of that information still, but I didn't know what to learn. So when you start learning all of this clinical information as an advanced generalist tester, it's pretty overwhelming because there's a lot and you kind of have to pick and choose what you're going to learn. So I decided to focus primarily on things that would possibly come up in those recall questions. So I needed to learn some basic DSM stuff. I needed to learn the theories of behavioral change. I needed to all of that stuff that I don't know that much about it still. So that's what I did. I focused on the clinical and I relied on my experience for the macro stuff. And then part of the Therapist Development Center study system is learning through multiple methods. And I expanded that on my own as well. So I recommend, reading, writing, listening, testing, talking about it, using multiple methods to test your knowledge. You can go to the next slide, Anwar. All right, so what worked well? As I just said, the Therapist Development Center worked really, really well. Again, I use that as information to fill all of these knowledge gaps that I had. So if you already have a clinical degree, you might be okay without it. I would ask the clinical test takers to answer that question. But as an advanced generalist test taker, I really needed that clinical information. I was very strict about my study schedule and intentional about where and when I was studying. I put it in my calendar. I put it in my work calendar. If your work allows you to, I think it's worth discussing with your supervisor if you can use some work time to study. I know my supervisor was generous enough to offer me a few hours a week to do that. And that was really helpful because then I didn't feel like I was adding things to my to-do list. It was like, I'm going to use dedicated work time to do this. And I have to do it because I'm being paid to do it. So that was helpful. Even just an hour here or there was good because I might end my day an hour early and then I'd study for multiple hours after that. But at least that 1 hour got me going. So being intentional about that. When I was studying as well, so knowing that, I have this favorite TV show on Wednesday nights, I'm not going to study at all on Wednesdays because I know that I'll distract myself and be like, oh, but the show's on. And where I study as well. So some people study really well in quiet settings. I don't study well in quiet settings. So I would be intentional about going like to a restaurant or something or sitting in a friend's house while they were watching TV, just so I had some of this background noise going on that actually helps me focus. And then what worked well, those multiple methods. So if I didn't know something, I would listen to a lecture about it that was included in this study system that I paid for. Listen to the lecture about it, write down the new information that I was gaining from that lecture, and then going back to read what I had just learned. Also for studying the macro questions, because I know I mentioned that I was focusing primarily on the clinical information, but when I was studying that macro information, I read back what I already knew, to be honest. So like that ASWB exam guide, the Advanced Generalist ASWB exam guide that the Wayne State Library has, I saw a link to it on the very last slide of this presentation. That is really useful. It has a lot of different chapters that you can print, and I think it's a lot to read, but you can print them or download them, however you prefer to read. And I just read through it all like a textbook, and that helped supplement what I already knew, to be honest. So reading what I already knew, listening and writing to what was new. For the recall questions, as I mentioned, I picked what was feasible to me. I picked some, I can remember as Anwar mentioned, like the time you have to be experiencing symptoms to diagnose severe depression. Like I memorized all of those things because I felt like they were, easier to remember than some more abstract concepts. For practicing what I had learned, I talked about it. That's what helped me. So if I had, like when I was studying the personality disorders, I would just list them off to my partner and tell them about how interesting I thought they were. And that helped me remember them better. And then for checking knowledge, I did find the practice tests very useful. The Therapist Development Center comes with a handful of them. And then I also used some others that I found. But those were really useful, especially when, I think this is the kicker, when they provide a rationale for why you're incorrect. If they don't give you a rationale for why you're incorrect, it's not really helpful. But if they tell you why, then just reading why you were wrong for me was helpful to get a similar question correct the next time. Or I also went through and saw that I was getting specific types of questions wrong. So like I was getting a lot of the like maybe DSM questions wrong. And so I would group what I got incorrect and then go back and study those areas specifically. So that was helpful. You can go to the next slide, Anwar. Thanks. And what didn't work well. So these are all things that I tried. I'll start at the bottom actually, as I've mentioned this a few times already. Trying to cover everything did not work. So knowing that I did not have a lot of clinical information, trying to learn it all was not going to be feasible. So I pick and chose, to be honest. And that was not everything that I chose was on the test. Some things were on the test that I chose not to study, but it didn't make a big enough difference that it seemed to matter. I passed, so this seemed okay. And then starting back from the top, things that didn't work, flashcards weren't helpful for me. I do learn well by writing things down. So I made a bunch of flashcards. I did not go back once and look at them. So a notebook is probably sufficient if you also like to write. Long study periods didn't work. It was too distracting. It was too much information to take in at once. So I limited my study periods to 2 to 4 hours, honestly, usually closer to 2. And then distracted studying. So I know I said earlier that like I do study best in like with background noise going on, but having people around you, so like having a study partner didn't work for me because it was too distracting to be able to talk to someone while I was studying. But I know that works well for other people. Having like a television show on in the background isn't going to work. Like you need to be a little bit more focused than that, in my opinion. So that distracted studying didn't work very well either. And then I think next slide should be last. So out of all of that info, my best recommendations for the advanced generalist test are: 1, if you can, invest in those study materials because it is mostly clinical information. And if you are in the advanced generalist track and you've done the advanced standing and everything, that clinical information is probably pretty far off from what you remember. And then also multiple resources. So like I was saying, the ASWB exam book was really helpful for that macro information, the development center for the clinical information, and then using people around me to talk about what I had learned. And then being intentional about your study time. It is a short period of time, but I do think that if you study for too long, it can be negative. So if you set yourself a schedule and you are just very intentional about sticking to that schedule, I think that that can help reduce some anxiety because you're taking in all of this information, you are learning so much along the way, and you have a goal clearly in sight of when you'll be taking this test. And so that's what worked for me.
Thanks so much, Kendra.
Mm-hmm.
I will point out that the exams that I mentioned that we have available on our website is an example of because you're given opportunity to take short and long exams, and I think everyone here on the panel will agree that having opportunities to practice is such an important part of preparing for this exam. And you know, as many times as you're able to do it, I think it proves to be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not keeping track of the chat. Again, I think what we'll do is ask our panelists to present, and then maybe folks can feel free to put questions in the chat or jot them down. We'll have time, and folks will ask you to unmute and ask questions, or I can ask one of our colleagues to read the questions a little bit later after everyone goes. So I'd like to then turn it over to Eric, and I will mute.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Perfect. My name's Eric Schimmel. I recently passed the advanced generalist exam, so I did it in one try. So I'm very, very excited about that because, like Anwar had mentioned, it is definitely expensive. And a lot of what I'm going to have to say is very similar to Kendra. As a macro social worker, especially the like recall questions are stuff that we aren't necessarily using on a daily basis in our current roles. So you definitely take some time to dust up on those and refresh what we learned during our MSW program. So my plan, I did a decent amount of of research beforehand, trying to figure out what was the best time period. As Kendra said, I think you can definitely overstudy. If you're spending 6+ months studying, you might not remember what you even studied 6 months ago. So I think having a plan, setting out a schedule. So I also set in my calendar, okay, blocked off an hour to study a week, especially leading up to it in that 3 months, to know, okay, hold myself accountable. You need to be studying during this time. Identifying resources. So there is a ton of resources out there. This presentation will definitely name a ton of them. This was a big one too, the ASWB guide. Anwar, I need to give this back to you. That was really helpful in teaching you what especially for recall items, to identify what I needed to study in that regard. Another one that I really enjoyed was I found a YouTube channel his name's Philip Luttrell, and he has a ton of videos where he breaks down the questions on the test. And I really think that's a big part of it, is figuring out what they're even asking. Many of the questions are full paragraphs, and it's easy to get lost in that web of a question. So he does a really good job of breaking them down. He'll highlight the question as he's reading it, or highlight sentences. And I found those videos to be very helpful. If you can identify study partners, I think that's another good way to hold yourself accountable. Even if you're not necessarily studying in the same room, I think you can at least be in contact and saying, hey, I was studying this today, like keeping you accountable, because it's easy to put these things on the back burner. It's not the most exciting to be studying for an exam for 3 months. So for myself personally, I needed somebody to hold me accountable. And then figuring out what works for you, right? If you're auditory, visual learner, and like Kendra said, I think using variations of those styles can be helpful. And yeah, we can go to the next one here, Anwar. So what worked well for me? So those, as I mentioned before, the Philip Luttrell YouTube channel, let me drop, I'll drop that in the link or in the chat here. I found those to be very helpful. He has a full website, and I think he actually offers individual tutoring as well. So if you have the resources to pay for some additional resources, I think that could be useful. I personally didn't. I use what he has put out there for free, and I found it to be very helpful. He also has some like acronyms that he uses. So specifically for the application questions, he uses like, okay, safety first, then feelings, then assess, then refer, educate, advocate, facilitate, and intervene. And I really tried to drill that acronym in my head to be able to write that down as soon as I got in the test. Because you do get like your own little personal whiteboard when you walk in. So I think knowing some things that okay, I want to quick, even I was doing it in the car before I went into the test, of really hammering those things in my head. And then as soon as I sat down, writing them down immediately and then starting the test. That was definitely helpful for myself. And then Wayne State, they have some great resources as well, relatively inexpensive for $20. And I was able to take several exams through the Canvas course, which I think that's another big thing, to take an exam early, to kind of figure out, okay, this is where I'm at the moment, and then go through and figure out, okay, these are the areas that I'm struggling with. I know for myself, recall questions were definitely a struggle early on. So knowing, okay, I really need to study Erickson and Piaget, and especially the medication. I wasn't sure if the medications were even going to be on there as the macro clinician, but I did have some medication related questions. So you definitely want to study up on those as well. Let me go to the next one, Anwar. Thank you. So I did what didn't work for myself. Study partners can be a little bit more difficult to find, especially for the advanced generalist exam. Sure Kendra knows this as well, that it can be a little more difficult. There's not as many macro social workers who go on and take the exam. But I think it is important, especially moving forward, to provide supervision. Like myself, I was lucky enough to have Anwar provide me supervision as we worked on a couple of our training grants. So finding a supervisor as a macro clinician can be a bit of a struggle, but the School of Social Work can definitely help in that regard. And then podcasts, I really struggled to find good podcasts. I noticed actually on the Philip Luttrell website, he does have a podcast, and I don't know if they were out when I took the exam. So maybe those could be helpful, but typically I'm a big podcast person, and I wasn't really able to find anything that was helpful. And then overstudying, I think you can definitely overdo it. Early on, I think when I took a practice exam and did not score very well, I think that really pushed me to especially hit on those recall items. And it ended up being counterproductive, where I'm overstudying these items and then mixing them up and not really giving them the time that I should have. So I think it's best to really plan out your study schedule and stick to that.
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Karen.
Hope you're having a hard time hearing you, Karen. I think we're going to do, Anwar, we're going to do questions at the end.
Unmute. So if I can ask folks to hold off their questions, please, until the end. So after Eric is done, we have a couple more people, and then we'll make sure there's time for everyone to ask their questions. In the meantime, if I can ask folks, if I can ask folks to please mute, that would be helpful so that everyone can hear the speakers.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Go for it.
Perfect. So some of the things that helped me out, I think, like I mentioned, know yourself, know your study habits, what works for you. Do you need an exam partner to hold you accountable, to make sure you're doing the studying that you're saying you're gonna do? The exam practice questions, those YouTube videos, probably watch hours of those YouTube videos, just having him walk you through how he was viewing the question. And that was helpful for me. I'm not gonna say it's helpful for everybody, but I think that's a nice resource, his website and YouTube page, you can get like a free taste of it. And if you think that's gonna fit with your style, you can look further into the paid options. The Wayne State practice exam for $20, that is, I think, the best deal that you can get. There's an entire Canvas website with a ton of resources on there. So that's, I think, definitely worth the money. And be ready the day of, right? Try to get a good night's sleep. Try to relax. I know that's not going to be easy. It wasn't easy for myself either. And definitely eat something before, because it is a pretty long exam. I know it took me, I think I used basically the entire time of maybe 15 minutes. So it's worth taking your time. I know too, while I was in the exam, there's the different settings you can do. It's all on the computer. And there's one where you can see like how many questions you have left. And that was not good for me, because I was just getting anxiety of like, I should be more than halfway right now. Why am I so far behind? So you can turn that off to not know where you're at. So certain things when you're in the test can definitely add to the anxiety, and that was one of them for me.
Thanks, Eric. I think one of the things that video, if you play it at ASWB, they'll tell you how to prepare. And I think Eric's suggestion about getting a good night's sleep. And some people will say that they made sure they knew where the center was. So they drove to it the day before to make sure, so that the morning you're not anxious about that. And, figuring out, eating something that will help you versus something that will make you feel heavy. So just those kinds of things that are easy to do can be very helpful, I think. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. And Lisa, you're on. I will mute myself.
Awesome. Thank you, Anwar, and the whole panel here. It's really great to see everybody. There is so much, you guys. So I'm going to jump right into, and before we really get into the first slide, I do want to say, because I did see a question on here about noting how many times did we actually take the exam. I took the exam 3 times. 3 times the charm. And so I'll get into more of what happened with all of that and lessons that I learned. So we can go ahead with the first slide. So first things first, obtain study materials based on my learning style. And there's a lot of great recommendations that both Eric and Kendra mentioned. And one thing that I want to point out, this book right here, I don't know how well you can see it, LEAP. I highly recommend LEAP, and I'm actually going to put their website in the chat. But LEAP is a very, very great program that's also highly recommended, along with the one that Kendra used, the Therapist, I think, Development Center. Those are some of like the top 2 programs that are recommended. I really needed that program, and it was really beneficial for me simply because I needed something to go along with how I learn. And I think understanding and just being very familiar with your learning style will really help you tremendously. I'm auditory along with kinesthetic, so I need something to touch and hold on to and do, along with hearing things. So I could read it, but I also found myself needing to read out loud so I could hear myself reading it. And also in the package that I purchased with LEAP, they have an actual audio package that goes along with the package as well, the full package. And so from there, that just helped me really retain that information that I was learning. And I did create flashcards that worked for me, because for me, I kind of categorized everything based off of color. I did take the clinical exam, and that one was very heavy on application questions and reasoning, along with a lot of recall. But, we had to know a lot of medications. We had to have a good understanding of, the diagnosis, DSM-5 and all those things. So I really needed to spend some time with those flashcards along with theories and things of that nature. So that really helped me tremendously. Also, getting started 2 to 3 months in advance, I cannot agree with my colleagues more. If you study a lot, for a long period of time, you can forget. And for me, it was a challenge because taking it 3 times, as you can imagine, I would study, for the first time, like 2 months, take the exam, fail, then go back, pick my face up, study some more, go back, fail, and so it was really tough because I realized, that I had to kind of rework how I was approaching things. But each time I did prepare about 2 to 3 months in advance. And you may ask, well, Lisa, you're, going over the same things. Not necessarily. What happened with me is the first 2 times, and I don't want to jump too far ahead on my slides, I used different study materials. It wasn't until the last time before I took the exam the 3rd time that I actually purchased LEAP. And so that program did make a big difference for me. Set days and time frames for weekly study. This was really important. For me, I am a single mother. I have 2 teen sons, and I work full time and also work in private practice on the side. So I'm pulled in a lot of different directions. So it was very important for me to schedule time every day. And for me, it was 5 days a week. And then closer, as it got closer to the exam, I want to say maybe 3 weeks out, I studied 7 days, like every day. But I would get up at 5 in the morning. That was the best time for me. I'm wide awake in the morning, and I would study for anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, going over, reading the items, listening to them, and going through my flashcards, as well as doing practice questions. So that helped tremendously, but sticking with it is the key. Weekly rewards for studying. Okay, so we're busting our butts studying, right? Every week. I needed a reward. That meant for me chocolate because I'm addicted to chocolate. That also meant some kind of movie. You know, I'm a movie buff. I love watching good movies. So I had to take that break to reward Lisa for doing a good job studying. So I implemented that towards the end, of course. Accountability. This one is huge. Making sure your friends, your family, any significant others are aware, you know, is really, really helpful of what you're doing, the time frame you're looking at, and the fact that you're preparing. For me, my kids were aware, my close family and friends, and they checked up on me. You know, they said, well, Lisa, how are you doing with your studying? You know, because of course, many of them were there when I would fail the exam, and they're right there patting me like it's okay, you know, as I'm crying, right? And so they, you know, checked up on me, made sure that I was actually studying, that I stuck to my guns and what I said I was going to do. So that was very helpful. And having that accountability does make a difference. You go to the next slide. Now, what worked well? Understanding how to leverage that 4-hour time frame. I love what Eric mentioned about eating beforehand. That's like so important because that does affect how you are taking this exam, you guys. One of the things that's really important is that in that 4-hour time frame, you have the 170 questions, right? And we know that 20 of them are thrown out, but you don't know which ones. What this calculates out to is 1 minute and 25 seconds for each question that you have to actually keep moving through and make use of that whole 4 hours. Now, the idea here, though, is to not take that long so that you actually have time to go back and review any questions that you flagged that you felt like you really needed to. So the important thing is when you're doing recall type questions and practicing that, or anything that you can memorize, that is going to be your best bet because you're not going to spend 1 minute and 25 seconds on a recall question. So those flashcards for me, memorizing the theories, you know, of course, Erickson, Piaget, Freud, you know, and all of that, the medications, that really helped because when I ran across some of those recall questions, I was done with those in 5 seconds. That way, that gave me more time to focus on the reasoning as well as the application-based questions. Trusting myself and not changing the answers. This is huge. As you're going through the exam, you know, and this has been mentioned before, I don't want to be redundant, but you have 4 answers, you know, choices to choose from. 2 of them usually are not the right answer and they're pretty obvious, but the other 2, it could be one or the other. So realizing that usually the first answer you pick is usually the right one, just trust that. Trust what you already know and don't go back and change answers. Knowing what I needed in my prep materials, this is huge as well, structure and organization. The first 2 times I took the exam, you guys, I did utilize some of those YouTube-based programs like Philip Luttrell. He's amazing. I know a lot of people, including Eric, benefited so much from his program and so many others. That really didn't work for Lisa. And it didn't because it wasn't exactly as structured and organized as I needed it to be. So I needed something that was actually housed and packaged all together so that I could actually go through it in an organized fashion, be able to listen to the, you know, auditory version of it in my car, on my phone, you know, however I wanted to do it. And I needed it packaged all together. I found myself all over the place in my preparation for the first 2 times that I took the exam. And you know, that didn't really work well. So knowing that I needed that structure and organization really made a difference, you know, on that 3rd time around. Maintaining a positive attitude. Okay, so real talk. As you probably have experienced, for those of you that have encountered any of the practice questions, some of them really sound like they make no sense. And so as you're experiencing that, remember when you're in the exam, don't get frustrated. I know I made that mistake because I'm looking at it like, okay, really, what is this? You know, and just remembering that it's okay. You need to expect that there are going to be questions on the exam that really may not make sense. And that's okay, because all you need to do is just take a deep breath, step back and go back to that question, read through it, break the question down, understand what it's really asking, and go through those answers and give it your best shot and choose the best answer for that question. Don't get upset with it. This is how it is. Going to the bathroom midway through, that they do not stop the clock. I just want to warn you, if you do have to do that, it's okay. But move with a purpose. It actually is a refresher. It gives you a minute to just breathe, relieve your bladder, as well as take a quick sip of water. It just helps you kind of get that second wind that you could get, to finish up the second half of the exam. Believing in the fact that you belong there, and that I belong there, that was something that was huge for me. Imposter syndrome is real, especially after you have failed twice. You're looking at it like, okay, am I really supposed to be doing this? And so I had to remind myself, yes, I am, and I do belong here. Just encourage yourself when, you're going through the process of preparing, and actually when you're sitting there in the exam. Next slide. What didn't work? Doubting myself and changing answers. The first 2 times, I'll kind of, let you guys know what actually happened when I took the exam. The first time I took the exam, I failed by 1 point. 1 point. I was in the lobby crying, okay? I could not believe that happened. Second time, I failed by 4 points. At that point, I'm like, okay, really, Lisa, what's wrong with you? What is going on? So I had to go back and look and learn from that. The consistent thing that I did in both exams, I changed answers. I was scared. I'm like, okay, I don't know. Would I do this? Would my agency do this? And to Anwar's point, you cannot answer those questions based off of what you would do or what your agency would do. This is a national exam, and it's a perfect world on the exam. So you want to remember that and answer the question based off of the best practice, based off of the code of ethics, and that's it. Don't get emotionally connected to it, and don't go changing answers. Trust yourself. Allowing distractions during the preparatory time frame. Okay, so can I be real? Significant others and family need to understand the time, effort, energy that you have to put into preparing for this exam, and they have to respect that. For me, I did not early on really make sure that I established healthy boundaries to ensure that that's what was taking place. So I was really getting pulled in a lot of ways emotionally, and that wasn't fair to me. So I want to just encourage you to remember to communicate what you need in this moment. This is a very important exam. You've gotten to this point. You're ready to sit for the exam. Give it all you got, and make sure that everyone else respects that. Allowing frustration through the exam. I mentioned this earlier. Don't get mad at the exam. The exam is going to have weird questions in there. Okay. It's designed to I'm not going to say it's designed to trip you up. We want to believe that, don't we? But let's just be 100. It is difficult, okay? So expect that, look for that. Using materials that did not work well for my learning style. Again, I can't stress this enough. Know thyself. Please know thyself. Know what you need and what works for you. As you've noticed, listening to Kendra and Eric, they both one of them is like, do a study partner. The other one's like, nope, that didn't work for me. I'm going to tell you guys, I cannot do a study partner because I love people so much. If you're sitting next to me, I'm talking to you, so I can't study with you. So it needs to be just me, silence, maybe some, they have the sound bowl meditation things on YouTube that helps me focus, and it also helps me stay calm. So those are just a couple of things that I realized that I needed to make changes in to help me actually pass the third time. Next slide. Okay, so the best recommendations that I can give you guys is allow the prep work to make you a better clinician. Don't look at this as like, okay, I got to study for this exam. No, just really allow it to make you a better clinician, and that the prep materials, and I love, this is what I love actually about LEAP. Shameless plug. What I love about them is that the fact that the programs are so well put together, it really does help you improve how you approach your cases. And so you want to take that approach. Everything you're doing is moving towards making you a better clinician. And I will say one thing that I wish I would have done, and this is actually, I should have mentioned this in the previous slide, was that, and this is a huge shout out to my mentor, Diane Cartwright. She's also adjunct faculty here at Wayne State University, School of Social Work. And so she actually recommended, and she's also my practice boss in a private practice I work in. And she recommended LEAP to me. And early on, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to, do this. I wrote it down like, okay, thank you. But there were so many other people making recommendations, and there's so many other amazing programs out there. So I'm trying to figure out which one is going to work for me, but I ended up starting and coming back to LEAP. And so I would recommend, I'm going to put the website address in the chat because I did see a question about how much it costs. It does depend on what you look at, what package you get. So I'll put that link in there. You guys can feel free to check that out, of course, but really take the time to invest in a real improving program, to make sure that you are ready for this. And have adequate preparation. Also, trust yourself. Again, don't go back changing answers. Really trust your own ability to take this exam. Trust what's in you. Trust what you've learned, here in grad school. And these materials will help reinforce that and remind you of key things that you do need to know for this exam. And give 100%. At the end of the day, you saw how much this exam costs. I took it 3 times. I got 3 times. And that was a significant investment for me. And it wasn't easy. I'm not going to lie to you guys, but either you go hard or go home. Either you're going to give 100% to this, or you just don't do it. So I just really want to encourage you, give everything you got to it. Also, just don't quit. As you heard, and I keep mentioning, I took this 3 times. I have this little quote up here that you can see Rocky Balboa, and there's a very significant reason for that. This quote, actually, I shared this quote in the commencement address that I shared when I graduated, actually back in December 2020. I was really honored to deliver our commencement address at graduation. And I shared this, and I didn't realize at that time how relevant it would be for me going through this testing process. But it was huge because it's not about the fact that I failed 2 times. It's the fact that I got back up. So do not quit. So if you were like me, or you may have failed more times than 3 times, and you're still like, okay, what do I need to do differently? Do not quit. Don't quit on yourself. Don't give up. Just keep going. Keep going. Because, we need your expertise. We need you in this field. That's it. So thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Appreciate it. All right, we have our final panelist, Christina Henning. And Christina, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll mute.
Thank you all. Yeah, I'm Christina Henning. I actually took the exam in January of this last year. I took the clinical exam. I took it 1 time. Yeah, so next slide, please. So my plan to prepare for the exam, honestly, for starters, I had to actually schedule it because I kept saying, oh, I'll study for my exam, I'll study for my exam. But until I had that date hanging over my head, I wasn't touching anything. I wasn't looking at anything. So that kind of like motivated me to move from like contemplative to action. And I didn't pay for any resources. I got everything for free. And let me tell you, your colleagues, your previous classmates, everyone in your life or in the field is such an asset to you. So be sure, ask for help, ask, what worked for you, what resources do you have? Odds are people will share those with you. Yeah, so I talked to supervisors at my agency and coworkers. The first thing I did was take a practice exam. I needed to know like, what was I gonna struggle with? What was I gonna be really good with? And like, what should I spend my time studying? The mobile app Behavioral Health Pocket Prep, it's free. It gives you a daily, I believe, 3 questions. You can pay for more. So I use that daily, and then you can take a like smaller practice exam like once a week or something like that. That was really effective for me. Let's see. So after I took that practice exam, I looked through the rationales of the questions that I had answered, and I studied the rationales. I didn't necessarily study the material. Because it's all about how they're asking the question. What is the what is the trigger word or the key word there? Like, what should you do first? What should you do next? That was really helpful for me. I'm really bad at sitting for a long period of time, so I needed to commit to like going to a bookstore and sitting for 2 hours, because you're going to be sitting for that exam for a long time. So that was really helpful. I sat, I did the practice test. I did the practice thing on my phone, very helpful. And then after studying the rationales, reviewing the material that was difficult for me, I went back and took a second practice exam to kind of give myself that confirmation that like, okay, I'm ready for this. Yep. What worked well? Yep, so scheduling the time, as everyone was saying, you had to be intentional about it. I think I chose Sundays because I wasn't working and I could set that boundary with family and say, hey, I'm not gonna be available for you on Sundays. Leave me alone, put my phone on D&D, and it worked really well. Again, reading the rationales, I think something that was really helpful for me was approaching the questions from like Maslow's hierarchy. So like always assessing for safety first, you have to meet those basic needs first and then working your way up. Dressing for success. If I had shown up to that exam in my sweatpants, I probably would have fallen asleep sitting there for 4 hours. So I did wear like what I would wear to work going into the office. That was really helpful for me. You can't wear jewelry. So you read the rules of your testing site as well. Because I think I wore my necklace and I had to take it off. And so that kind of like jolted me walking in. Like, oh, I have to leave. And I was ready to sit down. So read the rules of your testing site. Again, that behavioral health pocket prep app, it's completely free and it does give the rationales, which was helpful because you could study those as well. And then questions that you got wrong, you could go back and retake. And asking your colleagues, your friends. I had the people that I graduated with, we had a group text message conversation to kind of hold ourselves accountable. We didn't study together, but we would text and say, oh, I'm going to study today, kind of like giving that affirmation and rooting for each other was really helpful as well. How long did you spend on one question? It depended on the question. I think someone mentioned like, you know, if you knew your stuff and studied more like the recall things, like definitions or theories, you either know it or you don't. So answer the question and move on. Again, I think Lisa mentioned, you know, trusting your gut or trusting your answer. Like that's so important because if you second guess yourself, you're just going to give yourself anxiety sitting there and reading those questions. So I definitely recommend just go with your gut, answer the question. If you're really unsure about it, flag it. I think I maybe flagged like 4, and I ended up going back and I answered the same thing my gut told me in the first place. So truthfully, just go with your gut, answer it, but you can flag those questions. Next slide, please. What didn't work? Studying on the fly. If I was like, oh, I'll study for an hour after work today, like I'll totally do that. I did not do that. Let me tell you, I lied to myself. So dedicating that time, putting it on my calendar and doing, for me, Sundays work because I knew I would be free and I knew that I wouldn't have other obligations was very helpful. I couldn't study at home. I have 2 beautiful dogs that I love so much, but they also want all of my attention. So they were always climbing in my lap. So I actually went to a bookstore. I popped in my headphones because I can't do background noise. So I listened to binaural beats. They have like meditation playlists on Spotify. I'm sure on Apple Music too. That was really helpful. I would not recommend anything with lyrics because I would pay attention to the lyrics and not the material that I was studying or reading. Yeah, I think that's all for that one. Yeah, so my best recommendation is definitely talk to your peers and your colleagues, people that you graduated with. Everyone has resources kind of readily available that have been shared with them, and pay it forward, share it with other people, and you know, swapsies. I got my hands on 2 full practice exams with the study materials that included the rationale and the answers to those practice exams for free just by asking. I have a quote that I also received at I post on Facebook, you know, my social work friends, like what helped you, and people actually commented or direct messaged me resources. So I will post that in the chat once I'm done with my section here. Yeah, I will totally share the name of the album there. And then, yep, taking that practice test before you even start studying, so you know what do I need to be paying attention to, like. I needed to brush up on the like psychopharmacology portion of things, like the names of medications or types of medications I wasn't really working with directly, but maybe like the diagnoses I was more familiar with. So that's where I spent my time, or I needed to brush up on the actual names of the theories for the recall because I could apply them, but what was the name of that again? I don't know. So reading the rationales was really helpful from that initial practice test. And lastly, just show yourself the same compassion you would show to a client or a friend or a loved one. You know, like it is stressful. It can take a toll. So be patient with yourself, make sure you're getting enough sleep, drink water, and just be kind to yourself. And I think that's all for me.
Thanks
I-
very much.
Yeah, I'll
go
drop.
ahead.
Thanks.
Right, so you'll drop some links in there, appreciate that. Have a couple of more slides, maybe I'll just share some of these and then we'll open it up. I'll stop sharing and maybe we can do Q&A with folks. So obviously you heard a lot of links and resources that will be shared or have been shared. We'll make this PowerPoint available on our website, and you'll see the previous PowerPoints from last year and the year before from when we had other folks that participated in this. You know, obviously there is not one thing that we can say is the end all be all for everybody. As you heard from our 4 panelists, different things work for different people. And each of them talked about really the importance of knowing who you are and your learning style and what works for you, which is unique to you. And I think it's not always easy to figure that out. Some of us have worked on that, and you know, we know that we work best in certain scenarios. And so if you don't know that, I think it's important to take some time to really think about your learning style and what works for you so that you can figure out which resource would be best for you before you decide to spend the kind of money that or not, right? As you heard, some people that you may be able to find resources online for free or other sources so that you can find what is best for you. These are from the Association of Social Work Boards. This is the guide to the exam. But I will tell you that a lot of the information about the exam you can find online on their website. So again, taking time to read it will be helpful, and really learning about the exam from what other folks have said. So the candidate handbook is free. The guide to the exam is you can see they charge $15 or $20 depending on which one you have. And there are free downloads that you can definitely take a look at. One of the things I would encourage you to do, there's an outline of the exam so you can see both for the advanced generalist and for the clinical, and you'll see the percentage of questions in each area of the exam. So important to take a look at that as well. And then
Hello.
these are, hang on one second, I'm gonna open it up for
Okay.
questions. These are recommendations from our 2020 panelists. And so if you wanted to take a look at those, I think someone mentioned some of these links from before. And again, we'll make this available to everyone so that you can take a look at those. So let me stop sharing. And before I ask people to unmute themselves, I'm going to ask either Naila Burks or Lawrence Robinson if there were questions that were asked that you want to pose and see if our panelists want to answer those. And while you're looking, I will ask one question because I think this has come up each year when we do this. And I don't know who referenced it. Maybe it was Christina and or Lisa. This idea of flagging questions, right? I think I've heard different people say you have to be careful because if you'll flag too many, then that engenders anxiety, you know, because you have to go back and take a look at that. Lisa or anyone else, if you want to say something about that.
Yes, definitely. The first time I took the exam, I flagged about 20 questions and I was terrified. I mean, I was really nervous. I didn't want to mess up. I really wanted to pass, but I'm going to tell you that it spoke to the fact that I did not trust myself. I was not, I was kind of changing answers. I was nervous, so I'm flagging stuff as opposed to breaking down a question and really going through each of the answers. Now, the other part of that also spoke to the lack of my proper preparation. And you may say, well, you failed by a point. Yeah, but still, there were still certain basic things that I did not understand how to do. So I believe that when you have better preparation, you know how to break down that question. I think Eric mentioned this and even Kendra. When you know how to break down that question and read through the answers and select them appropriately, you will flag less questions.
Very good. Naila, any questions you want to pose?
It looks like some of them were answered, but one of them was, what is the difference between advanced generalist and the clinical exam? The advanced generalist is for students that are on the macro track, and then the clinical is for students on the micro track.
Good. I will add that while ASWB does say advanced generalist is for macro, as Naila mentioned, and as you heard our colleagues say, there are still questions on that exam that are very much clinically focused. So you know, if you're just preparing for the advanced generalist, you really need to take that into consideration. And, you know, for example, the DSM is something you want to make sure that you are familiar with, because they will have some questions that aren't what you would think of as being clinical. I think Kendra or Eric, I don't know if you want to add anything. I think you would agree.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that the majority of the questions were clinical questions, and I can't say exactly what was on the exam because you have to sign like a waiver beforehand, but a lot of the macro questions were more meso, so more about group work and supervision, not so much the macro. I don't think I had any research questions on my advanced generalist test, to be honest. And that's what I work in. So that was kind of disappointing, but but yeah, it's very clinical.
They do have there are different exams, right? Because they have a bank of questions. So it's, you know, if you take, like, I'm sure Lisa will agree that when she didn't take the same exam, obviously. When you go in, the questions are put in differently. Certainly the 20 that they test vary. So you can, however many times you would take it, you will see different exams that you will take.
You will. And even on a clinical exam, I did get a couple of research questions.
Right.
And I was thinking to myself, like, seriously, I'm so happy I studied this. But I don't do any of that. You know, I'm working with clients one-on-one all day. So yeah, you will see that. But of course, mine was a lot more focused on clinical, obviously.
Yeah, very good.
I can say that the clinical questions on my exam weren't as clinical as I expected them to be. So like I did learn a lot of different medications and diagnoses and things, but it was more about working with the individuals than it was the DSM specifically. So if you have like some general knowledge about social work competencies, those clinical questions are a little bit easier.
I saw a question that just popped up. Is there a limit to the number of times you can take it? No, there isn't right now. There has been some discussion in the state of Michigan about whether there would be a limit, but there isn't. And we know people that have taken it several times. And that's what we're hoping to not get folks to do, that you know, really think about preparing so that you can pass it, hopefully the first time, if not the second or third time.
Hi, I don't mean to interrupt, but are they writing questions? Because I don't see a place, and I have a couple of questions, but I don't see a place where I can
Go ahead.
write it in.
Go ahead. You can
I just
pose your question.
two questions real quick. You're welcome. I'm sorry. The first one is that you said that there were different tracks that they have on there. That when I called to take mine, I graduated back in 2015 and I've been working since then, but I became disabled. That's what I wanted to ask you about, because I became disabled because I suffered a concussion. And what I wanted to know was, the first one was that when I called, they keep sending me, Lara keeps sending me notices saying, come on, take the test. And they said, when I called them, they said I had to take the clinical one. They said that I was already in there for advanced clinical. And I want to know, is advanced clinical a different test than just regular clinical?
There are two exams that are available for master's level social workers who are moving from the limited license to the full license. So you move from LLMSW to LMSW, licensed
Right.
master social worker. And
Right.
the state of Michigan has two designations. You're either LMSW clinical or LMSW macro. If you're intending to get your LMSW clinical, then you take the ASWB clinical exam. If your designation is going to be macro, then you would take the advanced generalist exam.
So advanced, it didn't say it like that. When I talked to her, she told me, she said, no, yours is advanced clinical. She said it's 3 of them. But is that not true? Because I didn't understand that.
In Michigan, there are only 2 exams.
Okay.
It's the clinical exam or the advanced generalist exam.
Okay.
So it's going to be one or the other. There's an exam that is called masters that Michigan doesn't participate. Like, we don't take that. Don't take that. You'll waste your money.
Oh, okay.
So depending on your designation, if you're applying for your full license under the macro or the clinical, whichever one, then you take the exam that fits those. If you're clinical, you take the clinical exam. If you're macro designation, you take the advanced generalist. Those are the only
Yeah, my
2.
track was the behavior therapy track. But what I wanted to know was, like I said, my second part of my question was that I am disabled. And Wayne State, I was working in that department. They put me in a program because I was disabled while I was still in school doing my GC in disabilities. I had already graduated with my master's. But what I wanted to know was, is there any allowances for that when you take the exam?
So you're asking if ASWB provides accommodations, and they do. So when you sign up to take the exam, you need to let them know they're probably going to need verification. And
Yeah,
then,
I have.
so make sure you work with them. They will work with you to identify what accommodations you need and what they can offer. But yes, make sure that you let them know, and they'll work with you on that.
Because the reason I asked that is because it's not physical, it's mental. Because like I said, I suffered mental disabilities. When I suffered 2 concussions, and it really messed my memory up. So I wanted to know. I know what I know because I've been working in social work forever, so to speak. But I wanted to know if it's going to be probably difficult for me to memorize everything with the questions and all. And I want to know, is there a different type of way they do it for people that have mental disabilities or that messes with them educably?
Christina, do you want to elaborate? I think one of the things that you noted, I think, is important to maybe say out loud.
I don't know exactly what accommodations they do provide, but I do know that when I registered for my exam, there was a section to say that I need to request accommodations, at which point, like, you would flag that, and I think they would reach out to you or coordinate with you to figure out specifically what you needed. So I've heard about like testing, like extended testing times, or like testing in your own room. If sound is an issue for you, at least where I tested, there was a set of headphones at the desk that didn't produce sound but was just sound blocking. Those came automatically, but I think other accommodations you would request when you do register for your exam.
Yeah, and
Okay.
you can definitely call ASWB before you pay the money and find out more details and let them know what your accommodations require, and they'll let you know what is available. I would definitely go to the source and do it before you register so that you're clear as to what they're able to do, for sure.
Thank you both.
No problem. Naila and Lawrence, if there are other questions feel free to unmute and post for our panelists.
There was one. What is the score needed for passing? How many hours is allowed for the test, and where are the tests administered?
Good questions.
The scores are vary because the tests are different. Some tests are easier and some tests are more difficult. So it really depends on the type of test you have, and you won't know. So your goal really, it's not even, I can't even say there's an actual number you should shoot for. You just have to really prepare and give it your best shot. And again, don't go changing answers. And hopefully you make over that cutoff that they determine is a passing score, depending on the type of exam they've given you. And again, you won't know, they're not going to tell you.
The questions that are on the exam are weighted, and they're weighted on the basis of difficulty. So some questions are weighted more than other questions. So in some exams, you might pass the exam with 75, and other exams you might pass with a 70, depending on the weight of each question. So you want to be mindful of that. And again, they mix the questions around, so there are different formats of the exam when you take it, for sure. Someone asked about the 6-year thing, and I think it bears repeating here. Remember, when you have your limited license in Michigan, you have to renew it every year. You should not renew it if you're not working, because you're only allowed to renew the limited exam 6 times. If you renew it 6 times and you don't have your hours and haven't passed the exam, you're going to be in trouble, because you won't be able to renew anymore, and you won't be able to practice because you won't have your license. So only renew if you're working in social work, so that you're accruing those hours. If for some reason you stop working, and I've known students or alums who have said, they decide to have a family, or they move to another country and do something else. If you're not working, then don't renew your license. And then make sure that you're keeping track of that, and make sure that when you're ready, you need to let the state know there's a process to schedule the exam. ASWB won't let you schedule it with Pearson VUE until you sign up to say that you're ready to take the exam. And Lisa, if you fail the test, you have to wait a certain time.
You have to wait 90 days if you fail the exam. Now, there's a way you can get around that. If your employer requires that you pass that exam in order to continue your employment, you can submit documentation from them saying that their job is depending on them taking this exam and passing it. And so you can submit that, and they will waive that 90-day wait period.
Anyone else want to unmute and ask their question to any of our panelists?
Yes, Charles.
Please.
I took my exam yesterday and I did not pass it, unfortunately. And I heard earlier in this presentation that Wayne State has the practice exam, and it's $20. Well, I graduated back in 2016. And I think also I heard that that $20 fee, that's for recent graduates, 2 years or less.
I believe.
Wondering how much is it for me since I graduated in 2016?
I'm going to ask one of our colleagues to look that up. I feel like I want to say 75 or 80, but if someone can take a look, if maybe Nyla Lawrence, one of you can take it. It is still very reasonable, I will say. You're correct. The $20 fee is for people who graduated in the last 2 years. And then for those that were longer, and for some reason 80 or 85 comes to my head, but it's somewhere in that area. And
Okay.
well, if whoever finds that, if you can put the link in the chat for folks to access, that would be great.
And another question. Did you say that we would get a copy of this PowerPoint?
Yes, we'll send it out.
Great, great.
Thanks, Eric. Eric put that in the chat. That'd be great. Someone asked if they moved out of state, will they take a different exam? Please remember that the Association of Social Work Boards is a national organization. Every state and 10 provinces in Canada use the same exam. So once you pass the exam, you do not have to repeat, you don't have to take the exam again. When you move to another state, that state will accept that you pass the exam. You will just have to go through the step of applying for your license in that jurisdiction and pay their fee, but you won't have to repeat the exam if you've taken it and passed it.
I have a question. I just want to know what are the steps for taking the practice exam, the $20 one with Wayne State? Is it online or do I go to school or how does that work?
Eric, do you want to share how you did it for folks?
Yeah, so if you click that link, I'll drop it one more time. You have to go in because it is a little bit more. I think it's 75 if you if you haven't graduated within 2 years. So you go there and you just enroll in the course, and then they'll accept you into the Canvas course with all the materials in there.
And you'll get an email too with how to pay and everything. It's a little bit of work. So like don't sign up for that exam, for the Wayne State practice exam the day you want to take it. There's real people on the other side who are registering you for the classes and everything. So, give it a week or so before you want to take it, just to make sure that people have time to respond and set it up for you.
I think you're given a couple of full exams and maybe a couple of shorter exams. I mean, it's not, you're given an opportunity. Is that correct? I haven't taken it, so it's not in my head.
Just 2 full exams and 1 30-question exam.
Thank you, Lawrence. Lawrence, do you want to talk about the mentoring program we talked about? Just a couple of things. You're muted. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, so our alumni association partnered with the School of Social Work, and they host a mentorship program for the licensure exams, probably about 2 or 3 times a year. They do a cohort of about anywhere from 10 to 15 people, depending on how many people sign up. And what it is there's like a basically a list of workshops that you participate in. Learning about the basics of the exam. You get workshops about the same like we're doing here, when people who have taken it and how to prepare for the exam, how to deal with anxiety. And then you also get mentors. So you're assigned a mentor, 1 mentor to probably every 5 participants, and you meet with them one-on-one. They provide you with materials and resources to study for the exam, and just to really be there for you, answer questions while you're studying as well. They hold you accountable by helping you to pick an exam date. And let's see what else. I mean, those are the basics of it. They do practice questions as well, where you'll go through a list of questions with your mentors, and they'll provide you the answers and things as such as well. And they just follow up with you until you take the exam or pass the exam. It's up to you. But it's very helpful, useful resource to find materials and even study partners as well.
If I could also mention there, I'm on the planning side for that program. And so when we match you up with a mentor, we ask, and then we look at what time you're planning on taking the exam and try to match you with fellow mentees who are going to take the exam around the same time. So if you want to hold each other more accountable, you can, like you're all taking it in the spring. So that's helpful. And we try to give people a mentor that is either clinical or advanced generalist, depending on what they're studying. And usually we get more mentors than we expect. So you get an advanced generalist and a clinical mentor in a lot of situations. So it's a good program. I participated as well. It's helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to chime in on that. I participated in the mentor program, and it was very helpful. And I'm just trying to absorb all the information I can as I prepare for the exam. But I found it participating in that program was very beneficial. And why am I here? Because I'm kind of procrastinating, but I have taken the first step to look at the ASWB book. So I've opened that up and I started looking, but I just want to piggyback on that. That's an outstanding program. And when I attended Wayne State, that practice exam used to be free. So it's no longer free. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and the way we had it was we purchased rights to several exams and made them available. We used to have a couple of computers that had them on there, and then you'd have to, we weren't able to put that online the way that it was. So you'd have to come to campus and sit at the computer and take it and be able to do that. The new exams, if you purchase them, you then have access to them via the internet. So you can do them from wherever you'd like, from home where it's comfortable. And so folks find that to be easier. We weren't able to do that with the free ones. So we purchased these to allow them to be available online. So it is 7:01. I appreciate everyone staying here. If I'd like to just give our panelists, and before I do that, really a shout out to them and thank them for the time and effort that they put into putting their slides together and preparing for this and being patient with me as I was bothering them to get their material and to make sure that we had everything. So I really appreciate that. And really, really appreciate all of the wonderful information they shared with you and suggestions that they gave. Again, we'll put that together and send it out to everybody. But any last minute or any last suggestions or anything any of our panelists want to share before we end?
I just want to
go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say, I just saw a couple of comments in there about, I've taken this exam a few times. I'm over it, again, you guys, please don't give up. If you can use my story as motivation, I said 3 times, so please don't give up. It's not about how many times you fail. It's about your ability to get back up after you do. Learn learn from it. Keep running, keep going. Okay.
Thank you.
I was going to say the same. Just trust yourself, have some confidence in what you already know, and just keep moving forward. Sometimes it's luck based on what questions you get.
Hello, Lisa, I want to say your story is very motivational and I truly appreciate all you guys. But I want to ask, is there a test, a practice test that we can take at Michigan State? I remember at one time, there was a practice exam test. So is that no longer available?
Do you mean here at Wayne State?
Yes.
Yeah. So what we have available now are online based. We used to have a free that was on a certain computer in our computer lab. That we're not able to make that available online. So we purchased exams and are making those available for alums at a reduced fee so that you can access them from home. If you graduated in the last 2 years, they're $20. If you graduated more than 2 years, you said 75, Eric, right? Yeah, 75.
Okay, well, my test was today and I rescheduled it because I wanted to meet with the panelists and see what they had to say.
Excellent. I hope it was helpful and we send good thoughts and energy your way as you take it. And
Thank
all of
you.
you. Absolutely. Eric or Christina, anything?
I would just second everything that's already been said and say, don't be afraid to ask for help, post on Facebook, post on LinkedIn, shout it from the rooftops. Like, there are people out there who've been through it and they want to pay for it because someone else helped them. So ask for help, post about it. I promise you people will reach out and lend a hand.
Thank you, because I need all the help I can get.
Yeah, same boat. Good luck, everyone. I'm sure you will do well. And don't be too hard on yourself if you aren't able to get there the first time. There's plenty of resources out there, and find the ones that are right for you.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.